Good morning. It's philosophy time.
Well, Piglet, could you tell me some stories? Yes, I suppose I could. Stories, said Pooh, opening his eyes. I would like to hear some stories, said Piglet. So would I, said Pooh, all seriousness aside. All seriousness aside. Let's see. We were just mentioning observation, spontaneity, and effortlessness. Would you like to hear the story of the old master and the horse? We won't know, said Pooh, until we've heard it. True enough. This is how it goes. A horse was tied outside a shop in a narrow Chinese village street. Whenever anyone would try to walk by, the horse would kick him. Before long, a small crowd of villagers had gathered near the shop, arguing about how to get past the dangerous horse. Suddenly, someone came running. "The old master is coming," he shouted. "He'll know what to do." The crowd watched eagerly as the old master came around the corner, saw the horse, turned, and walked down another street. "You see," I said, "the old master lived by the principle of Wu Wei, or effortless action. That's something the Taoists say we can learn by watching water." "Water?" asked Piglet. "When a stream comes to some stones in its path, it doesn't struggle to remove them or fight them or think about them. It just goes around them. And as it does, it sings. Water responds to what's there with effortless action." "I think I'm missing something," said Pooh. "Missing something where?" I asked. "In the story." "Oh, that. The old master knew he didn't have to go down the street. He knew he could go another way." "But why didn't the others know?" "Ah, precisely. Why didn't they know?" "I wouldn't have gone down that street," squeaked Piglet, "not with a horse in the way, or a goat, or a dog, or anything." "But why didn't the others?" "My dear Pooh," said Owl, flying over to the writing table, "in problems of this sort we must consider the physical properties involved." "I didn't know there were any," replied Pooh, rubbing his ear. "This is to say," continued Owl, somewhat annoyed, "the street in question was narrow, and the horse was large, and furthermore it was belligerent." "Further along it was what?" "It kicked. The old master knew it was futile to proceed." "We know that, Owl," I said. "The point is, oh well, so much for stories. Let's go on to the next principle. When you observe the natural world, you'll eventually see that everything in it is designed to succeed, including what some might judge to be bad. If you want to learn the natural world's principle of success, you'll need to see things not as good or bad, but as they are. This does not mean discard morality or common sense or anything of that sort. It simply means, well, let's show what it means by a couple examples. Many centuries ago, the Chinese Empress Si Lingqi overheard complaints that worms or moth larvae were devouring the leaves of the royal mulberry tree. So she went out to see what was happening. She watched the larvae as they spun their cocoons of strong, shimmering thread. Observing their movements as they spun, she conceived of a way to extract the fibers and weave clothing material from them. Her observations and experiments led to the cultivation of what became one of the world's most treasured natural fibers, the magical material known as silk. On returning from a walk about 40 years ago, the Swiss engineer Georges de Menstral found cockleburrs clinging to his clothes. Unlike countless other people who had cursed the prickly seed pods, picked them off, and discarded them, he asked himself, why did they stick? Examining them closely, he found that they were covered with tiny hooks, which had become embedded in the loops of the clothing fabric. He considered it if it would be possible to develop fasteners based on the hook and loop principle, which would be their nature to be more flexible than anything being used. From his watching and wondering came Velcro, from velvet crochet or velvet hook, fastening system made from which we now used all over the world in applications too numerous to mention. Despite the tired old claim that necessity is the mother of invention, it's usually observation and imagination that deserve the credit. The major portion of useful inventions, knowledge, and achievement has been brought about by curious, childlike, creative observers of the world around them, whose vision is unclouded by judgment of what is possible or impossible, good or bad, than the such. The telescope, for example, was invented in principle by some Dutch children playing with defective lenses discarded from a shop of a spectacle maker. They found that when the lenses were held one in front of another, which of course everyone knew was not supposed to be done, distant objects appeared closer. News of their discovery spread to Italy and to the eager attention of a man named Galileo Galilei. When you see beyond good and bad, you are much better able to recognize and make the most of what's there. One of the many advantages of seeing things as they are is that we can solve problems through observation and deduction. After all, how can we solve problems if we can't first clearly see what they are? The best time to see them is in the beginning. Most major difficulties are caused by failure to observe the minor difficulties that they start out as. Trouble is easily stopped before it commences, wrote Lao Tse. Put things in order before chaos occurs. In other words, an ounce of preservation is worth a pound of pesticide. The overwhelming tendency in unobservant industrial society, however, is to ignore small problems until they become enormous. Then panic! Call out the troops. Mad Tyrant number 12 is taking over the world. We've got to stop him, even if we have to kill 500,000 people doing it. Oh, it's simply awful. Well, let's see. Who sold him his weaponry? We did. Who trained his military forces? We did. Who supplied the materials he wanted? We did. Who supported his vicious dictatorship for years because he persecuted our enemies? We did. And who ignored his unstable personality, his destruction of anyone who opposed him, and his repeated threats against the world order for all that time? We did. So there you are. What can be just as hard to see as problems in the making is that a good many problems aren't really problems to begin with. People who don't see situations for what they are often struggle against difficulties that aren't there and create difficulties in the process, or turn small difficulties into large ones. Compounding any problem is the traditional Western response to difficulties, real or imagined. The tendency to see them emotionally, perceiving them as threats to one's personal survival, threats that must be fought tooth and nail to the bitter end. In the East, such an approach to life is considered rather immature. Overdoing it, wasting energy. Or as the Chinese saying puts it, painting legs on the snake. So, in solving problems, one needs to know if there are problems. Gratitude for the train. Is what appears at first to be bad truly bad? The following selected Taoist writing shows the importance of that question. The first is our streamlined version of a story by Luan. An old man and his son lived in an abandoned fortress on the side of a hill. Their only possession of value was a horse. One day, the horse ran away. The neighbors came to offer sympathy. "That's really bad," they said. "How do you know?" asked the old man. The next day, the horse returned, bringing with it several wild horses. The old man and his son shut them all inside the gate. The neighbors hurried over. "That's really good," they said. "How do you know?" asked the old man. The following day, the son tried riding one of the wild horses, fell off and broke his leg. The neighbors came around when they heard the news. "That's really bad," they said. "How do you know?" asked the old man. The day after that, the army came through, forcing the local young men into service to fight a faraway battle against the northern barbarians. Many of them would never return, but the son couldn't go because he'd broken his leg. The second selection is from Changse. Once, when Duke Hunan was passing by a marsh, a goblin appeared in the road before him. The Duke turned to Quan Chang, who was driving the carriage. "Do you see anything in the road ahead of us?" he asked. "I see nothing," Quan Chang replied. By the time the Duke returned home, he was speaking incoherently and become ill. For several days he remained in bed. An officer called on the Duke. "How could a goblin harm you?" he asked. "You are injuring yourself. If your vital energy is weakened by fears and anxieties, you will become seriously ill." "But do goblins exist?" asked the Duke. "Yes, they do. By the small mountain lakes you will find the Li, around fires the Che, in the dust the Ling Ting, in the low-lying areas of the northeast the Peia and the Walong, and in the northwestern lowlands you'll find the I Yang. Around the marshes will be found the Wei To. Describe the Wei To, said the Duke. A Wei To is big around as the hub of a carriage wheel and as tall as lank as the axle. It wears a purple robe and a red cap. It heaps the sound of passing vehicles, and when it hears one, it claps its hands over its ears. Whoever sees a Wei To is destined to become a great ruler. That is what I saw, exclaimed the Duke, and he sat up, straightening his clothes. He began to laugh, and by the end of the day his illness had vanished. The third selection is also by Chung Se. The third selection is also by Chung Se, who uses an event in the difficult life of Kung Fu Te to illustrate a Taoist attitude. The armies of Chen and Se were locked in battle, and Kung Fu Te was caught between them. For 7 days he had nothing to eat but coarse soup. Although much tiredness showed on his face, he spent the time singing and playing his lute. Outside the house in which he was staying, 2 disciples discussed the situation. Twice now the master has been driven from Lu. He had to run from Wei. In Sung, the very tree beneath which he rested was cut down. In both Shang and Chao he faced the most extreme difficulties. Now here in between Chen and Se, he could easily be killed or taken prisoner. Yet he plays his lute and sings. What irresponsible behavior! Their words were repeated to Kung Fu Te, who pushed aside his lute and remarked, "They speak like small men. Call them in and I will talk to them." The 2 disciples entered the room. "Master," said one, "we are concerned about your conduct. It seems very strange, considering that you are presently in great distress." "Oh, am I?" Kung Fu Te replied. "When a man operates in harmony with the way of heaven, his teachings cannot but help but succeed. When he cuts himself off from the way of heaven, his teachings cannot help but fail. Looking within and examining myself, I see that I am acting in harmony with the way of heaven. I have the principles with which to overcome the terrible disintegration that I see around me. Yet you say that I am in distress. There may be difficulties at the moment, but I will not lose the virtue that I possess. It is when the ice and snow are on them that we see the strength of the cypress and the pine. I am grateful for this trouble around me, because it gives me an opportunity to realize how fortunate I am." He turned back to playing his lute. The first disciple began to dance. "I did not realize before how high and deep are the ways of heaven and earth," the second one exclaimed. Is good necessarily good? Is bad necessarily bad? It's considered good to be beautiful, but many people, through being beautiful, have ruined their lives and the lives of others. It's considered bad to be unattractive, but because of being unattractive, many have come to concern themselves with matters more important than surface appearance, and have gone on to make something special of themselves, in quite a few cases becoming beautiful in the process. It's considered good to be healthy and strong, but many energetic people lose their health and strength by taking what they have for granted, not knowing what it's like to be old and depleted, therefore not taking care of themselves until it's too late. It's considered bad to be ill and weak, but many have responded to such conditions by examining their lives and changing their ways of doing things, thereby building up their health and strength to remarkable degrees. Unattractiveness, illness, and weakness have many valuable lessons to teach those willing to learn from them. It's considered good to live a long life, but many spend their long lives sitting and complaining, watching television, describing their operations, and retelling for the umpteenth time what Aunt Gertrude said 40 years ago. Many great achievers died young, yet lived every minute of the time they had. In the meantime, we can look clearly at our lives and the life around us and live. Before we start crying and praying to the universe to take away our trials and tribulations, we might more closely examine what it has given us. Maybe the good things are tests, possibly rather difficult ones at that, and the bad things are gifts to help us grow. Problems to solve, situations to learn to avoid, habits to change, conditions to accept, lessons to learn, things to transform, all opportunities to find wisdom, happiness, and truth. To quote William Blake, "It is right, it should be so. Man was made for joy and woe. But when this we rightly know, Through the world we safely go. Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Everyone seems to have left. I'm still here, said Piglet. Oh, so you are. I enjoyed the stories. That's good. They helped me to reflect on things. Things such as fear. Oh, well, I'm going to go for a walk and do some thinking. I'll be back in a bit. Right you are. Have a pleasant time. When we see things as they are, we find a world of magic, the world that has been there all along, and we find ourselves wondering how we ever missed it. As Henry David Thoreau wrote, what is a course of history or philosophy or poetry, no matter how well selected or the best society or the most admirable routine of life, compared with the discipline of looking always at what is to be seen? Will you be a reader, a student merely, or a seer? Read your fate, see what it is before you, and walk into the future. And now, here's a riddle for Piglet when he returns. If good is not necessarily good, and bad is not necessarily bad, then what is small?